She offered herself to survive. He offered shelter to silence his grief. But as hunger, guilt, and mercy converged, what began as survival began to look a lot like love, and something deeper than either of them thought they deserved. The boy didn't knock. He just stood there, fists clenched and eyes too hollow for someone no older than 10. Dust streaked his face and dried blood rimmed one nostril. Behind him, leaning against a crooked fence post like it was the only thing keeping her upright, was a girl barely older. She didn't cry, didn't even blink. She just nodded once when the rancher stepped out onto the porch and met her eyes. Her name was May. His was Eli. And without a word between them, she handed herself over. Eli Danner had seen plenty of desperate in his time. This was worse. The boy, Theo, hadn't spoken a word on the ride up to the ranch house. May said he hadn't eaten in 3 days, just kept walking beside her until the horizon blurred. Her boots were worn through. Her dress was half a shade from rags, and still she'd kept him moving. Eli didn't ask where their parents were. He could guess. The war had taken plenty, but it was the years after that broke what was left. Drought. Plague. Men who called themselves merchants but left ash and fear behind. Whatever corner May and Theo had crawled from, they weren't running toward anything, just away. By the time the sun dropped behind the hills, Theo had eaten 2 bowls of stew and passed out by the hearth like a dog too tired to bark. May hadn't touched her food. She sat at the table with her hands folded back straight, watching Eli with eyes that didn't blink enough. "You can keep him," she said finally. "He's a good boy, strong when he's fed." Eli looked up from the stove, brow furrowed. "Keep him." She didn't smile, didn't flinch. "He's all I got. I'll work for him. You don't have to be gentle. Just feed him." She said it like a price, not a plea, like she'd already made peace with whatever came next. Eli didn't answer. He sat down slowly across from her, arms resting on the table's worn edge. "How old are you?" 17. "And him?" 10. Just turned. She glanced toward the boy still formed near the fire. "He used to laugh." Her voice broke there only a little. "Used to talk my ear off." Eli didn't press. He knew what it was to watch someone dim, to wonder if the fire in them would ever come back. He watched her as she stared at the table, her jaw tense like she was bracing for pain that hadn't come yet but would. "You said you'll work," he said finally, "but not just for food." May looked up sharply, wary. "No," Eli said, "I don't want that from you. I'm not a man who takes what ain't given." Something flickered in her eyes, relief maybe, or suspicion. "You don't know what you're offering," she said quietly. "You don't know what it costs to keep someone alive when you're the only one who can." Eli rose without a word. He moved to the pantry and pulled a blanket from the shelf, then laid it gently over Theo. "You'll both stay," he said over his shoulder. "You'll both eat." May didn't thank him, didn't move, but something about the way her shoulders fell forward, less rigid now, spoke louder than words. She didn't believe in mercy, not yet, but she'd take it if only for tonight. The next morning came with cold sun and brittle frost. Eli found May already outside, hauling a half-empty water bucket toward the trough. She moved stiffly but with purpose. He watched her a moment before calling out, "That well's shallow. You'll be hauling all day if you don't hit the deeper pump." May didn't stop walking. "Don't mind work. I can show you faster ways," he offered. "Don't mind time either." She emptied the bucket and turned to go again. Eli said nothing else. He knew the kind of pride that kept a person stubborn, even when it made no sense. Pride was what you clung to when you didn't have anything else. By the second day, Theo's voice had returned, quiet, hesitant, but real. He followed Eli around the barn, asking questions, most of which Eli answered. May kept her distance. She cleaned, fetched, scrubbed, folded. She ate what was offered but never asked for more. At night, she curled up on the cot Eli had set up in the storage room off the kitchen, not once complaining about the draft or the lack of a door. Eli didn't know what to make of her silence. It wasn't fear, at least not anymore. It was something colder, something that had calcified into routine. It wasn't until the 4th evening that things shifted. Theo had fallen asleep early again, cheeks flushed from the cold air and full stomach. May stood by the window watching the last pink of sunset stain the snow outside. Eli stood beside her but didn't speak. After a long silence, she whispered, "He still dreams about the cellar." Eli didn't ask what she meant. She kept going. They locked us in there when they left, said they'd be back, but they didn't come. It was 6 days before I got the lock open. Her fingers twisted in her skirt. I didn't tell Theo, he thought it was 3. Eli swallowed hard. He remembered cold spaces and promises broken by people who should have known better. You got him out, he said. You got both of you out. May turned toward him, expression unreadable. That's not enough, though, is it? Sometimes it's everything, Eli said quietly. Sometimes surviving's the bravest thing left to do. May didn't cry, but her shoulders shook once before she moved away, vanishing into the dark of the house. On the 7th day the knock came, not at the door but the barn wall. A man's voice called out, sharp and practiced. Eli Danner, got business with you. Eli stepped outside slowly, coat unbuttoned, rifle hanging loosely from his hand. 2 men waited by the fence line, both dressed too fine for the terrain. One held the reins of a 3rd horse. We were told you got new hands on the property, the lead man said, lips curling like he already knew something foul. Runaways, some debt tied to M. Eli's eyes narrowed. Ain't nobody here owes you a damn thing. That's so, the man chuckled. Girl like that don't walk through half the state for nothing. Somebody's looking. Eli didn't blink. You got a warrant. I got something better, the man sneered. A buyer. From the shadows of the porch, May stepped forward. Her face was blank, but her voice cut clean through the cold. I'm not property, you don't get to trade me, the man smirked. That's not what your uncle said when he signed the papers. Theo had appeared now too, standing behind May, his hand clutching the back of her coat. Eli stepped between them. You'll ride off now, he said, voice low but firm. Or I swear to God you'll wish you had. The 2 men didn't move at first, but something in Eli's stillness gave them pause. After a tense breath, they turned and rode off, spitting into the snow as they left. May didn't speak that night. Neither did Theo. Eli stood for a long time at the window, watching the road where the riders had vanished. He didn't know if they'd be back. He just knew he'd seen something in May's eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear, not desperation, fire, the kind that didn't die easy. And for the first time in months, Eli felt something shift in himself too, not grief, not guilt. Just the faintest, aching trace of hope. The days that followed weren't quiet, but they moved like things slowly falling into place. May didn't talk much, and Theo still woke sometimes crying out, but the ranch breathed different now, like it remembered how to hold life again. Eli didn't ask for explanations. He just offered space, warmth, and a second bowl of stew when needed. The questions hovered between them like ghosts they didn't know how to exorcise, but somehow that unspoken weight created a strange kind of trust. Not built from words, but from survival stacked day after day like firewood, steady, fragile, real. On the 8th morning, May sat on the porch before dawn, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee gone cold. She stared at the hills while the sun crawled up behind them, her braid frayed loose at the end and her shoulders wrapped in Eli's old coat. When he stepped outside, she didn't turn. You think they'll come back? She asked. Those men. Eli lowered himself to the steps beside her, boots scuffing the frostbitten boards. If they do, they won't get past the gate this time. May's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I keep thinking about it, not just what they said, but how easy it is to be given away. She laughed, low and bitter. He called himself my uncle, but I don't even know his name. I only saw him twice, once when Ma died, once when he came for the house and what was left in it. Her fingers tapped the rim of her cup like a nervous tick. He said keeping Theo wasn't worth it, said I could go if I wanted to, but if I took the boy I'd owe. Her voice went flat. So I owed. Eli didn't answer right away. He let the silence breathe. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I know what it is to owe. May turned then, surprised. You. He didn't look at her, eyes still fixed on the horizon. I lost my wife 2 winters back, then my son. He paused. A week apart, influenza hit hard, I buried them both behind the barn. The words came heavy like stone soaked in rain. The ranch's been empty ever since, not just the house, me too. May's mouth parted, but no words came. She just sat with it, letting the weight of it settle between them. Eli looked over at her finally, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's the debt I carry, one I'll never pay off. May exhaled and the breath came shaky. She didn't cry, but she didn't run from the quiet either. That alone was a kind of grace. Later that day, Theo came running from the coop with a grin so wide it nearly cracked his face. "Eggs," he shouted, holding up two perfect brown ones like treasure. May laughed, a real sound this time, surprised and bright, and Eli caught it like a spark on cold tinder. He didn't say anything, just nodded toward the skillet and told the boy to wash up. May cracked the eggs with practiced care, and for one breathless moment the kitchen felt like it belonged to them all. But peace didn't stretch far in places like this. That afternoon, Eli rode into town for supplies. May offered to come, but he shook his head. "You stay here with Theo. He's steadier when you're near." She didn't argue. The truth was, she didn't want to see another street, another pair of eyes that looked through her like a price tag. She watched from the porch as Eli's horse disappeared down the ridge, heart tight, mind twisting with unease she couldn't quite name. 3 hours passed before the trouble came. The knock this time wasn't soft. It landed hard against the back door like the butt of a rifle. May was in the pantry when she heard it, and her hand stilled mid-reach for the flour sack. Theo peeked around the corner, his face pale. "Don't answer it," he whispered, clutching her skirt. She pulled him behind her, moved quietly to the window, and peeked through the lace curtain. 3 men, not the same as before, but the look in their eyes was just as dangerous. Drifters maybe, opportunists. One of them held a rope already looped. The tallest looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks, but his grin was clean and full of teeth. "We heard a girl's been hiding out up this way," he called, voice oily and amused. "Ain't nothing wrong with visiting neighbors, is there?" May stepped away from the window, heart hammering. She didn't have a rifle. Eli had taken the only one. There was a pistol under the floorboard near the hearth. Eli had told her that once, but it might as well have been on the moon for how far it felt now. Her palms itched. Her breath came too fast. Theo clutched her sleeve. "We can hide." "No," May said softly, "not again." She moved fast, slid the table against the door, threw the bolt, then pulled Theo into the pantry and shut the door. "Stay," she whispered. "No matter what, don't come out till you hear me call." He opened his mouth to argue, but her hand on his cheek stopped him. "Please." They didn't wait long. The back window shattered with the crash of a boot, and May flinched as glass scattered across the floor. One of the men slithered through like a snake, scanning the room with eyes that didn't blink enough. "Come on out, sweetheart," he cooed. "Ain't no need to be shy." She stepped out of the shadows then, holding the cast iron skillet like a weapon. Her hands shook, but her spine held. "Get out," she said. The man laughed. "You're a little slip of nothing. What are you gonna do with that pan? Make us breakfast?" May didn't flinch. "You've got 5 seconds." He didn't even get through one. The front door slammed open with a force that rattled the rafters, and Eli's voice followed like a crack of thunder. "Get your hands off her." The intruder turned just as Eli fired. The shot rang through the house and slammed into the wall above the man's head, plaster raining down like dust. "Next one's not a warning," Eli growled, stepping into the kitchen, rifle raised. The other 2 men backed away from the windows fast, curses flying as they scrambled toward their horses. The last man turned, palms raised, face twisted in a sneer. "Wasn't doing nothing wrong," he spat. "Wrong house to test that theory," Eli said, voice low and deadly. "Move." The man hesitated just for a second, but something in Eli's eyes cut through the bravado. He slipped out the back the way he came, cursing all the while. When the silence returned, it was deafening. May sagged against the wall, breath catching in her throat. Eli set the rifle down and crossed the room. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Theo burst from the pantry and clung to her like he might disappear if he let go. "I'm sorry," Eli said quietly. "I shouldn't have left you alone." May looked up at him. "They would have come whether you were here or not." Her voice was steady again. "It's not your fault." But something shifted in Eli's face then, a darkness curling at the edge of his grief. "They came because I brought something back into this house, and that something deserves better than fear every time the wind changes." That night no one slept. May sat by the fire with Theo tucked against her while Eli paced like a caged thing. Finally, just before dawn, he stopped. "You should leave," he said. May didn't move. "You and the boy, you could go west, maybe find safer land." "There is no safe," May replied. "There's only where you fight for it." Her eyes locked with his. "I'm tired of running, and I don't think I'm the only one." Eli stared at her for a long time. Then he sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, voice hoarse. "You scare me," he said. May blinked. "Why?" "Because every time you choose to stay, I start to believe I might not be empty anymore." She didn't reply, just reached out, placed a hand over his. It was a quiet promise. Not yet love, not yet healing. But a beginning. The morning after the break-in, the ranch looked the same but didn't feel it. The fields lay silent beneath thin crusts of frost, the animals stirred like always, and smoke curled from the chimney in a steady stream. But something unspoken hovered in the air, a tension laced with memory, fear, and the echo of footsteps that hadn't earned the right to walk those halls. Eli saddled the mare with a quiet intensity, jaw locked tight, while May packed a small sack of food for the barn, her hands moving automatically, like the night hadn't happened, like she could force her body to forget what it remembered too well. Theo didn't speak. He trailed Eli in the morning like he always did, but his usual questions were gone. In their place was silence, and the way he flinched every time a board creaked or a breeze shoved the shutters. He'd seen too much already. May watched him with the kind of guilt only an older sibling could carry, like every breath he drew was one she stole from somewhere else. She found herself reaching for him more often now, brushing his hair aside, fixing his collar, folding his quilt tighter around him at night. Small things, but constant. She couldn't protect him from everything, but she could make the world feel a little less sharp around the edges. Eli noticed it all, of course. He didn't say anything, but his eyes followed her more now. Not with suspicion, not with desire, but something deeper. Worry. Admiration. Maybe even something closer to awe, though he wouldn't have used that word out loud. He'd seen folks break under far less than what she'd carried, yet she moved like she had no choice but to keep going, like stillness itself might kill her. By the third day, Eli finally spoke. They were in the barn, fixing the gate hinge that had splintered in the frost. May held the wood steady while he drilled through it, their arms brushing once, faint but electric. "I've been thinking," he said. May didn't look up. "About what?" "About how folks like us end up where we are." He paused, drove the screw in deeper. "You think it's luck or punishment?" She considered that a long while before answering. "Neither. I think some of us are just too stubborn to die." Her voice was soft but steady, and maybe that's enough. That night it snowed again, not heavy but just enough to coat the fence posts and blur the path to the well. Theo pressed his nose against the window, watching it fall like a silent apology. "Will it trap us in?" he asked. "Not this time," Eli said from the hearth. "Just makes things look softer than they are." May watched him from the table, her hands busy with mending but her thoughts somewhere else. "Everything looks softer in snow," she murmured. "Even the sharpest things." Eli met her gaze across the room, something in him tightening at the edges. Some things stay sharp no matter what. The quiet held between them until Theo broke it. "Can we build a snowman tomorrow?" Eli smiled, small but real. "We can try, but he might be skinny like me." The boy laughed for the first time in days, and May's breath caught just a little. But peace doesn't linger in places it doesn't trust. And the snow, soft as it looked, didn't come alone. It was late the next day when Eli noticed the tracks, fresh hoofprints near the eastern ridge, too deep to be his own. He stood there staring at them, heart thudding low in his chest. No wagon, no sign of a return path, just one rider moving slow and heavy like he was looking for something, or someone. Eli didn't go back to the house right away. He walked the fence line, scanned the tree line, checked for signs of camp or trail marks. Found none, but the unease clung to him like wet cloth. When he did return, May was in the kitchen, teaching Theo how to knead biscuit dough without turning it to paste. She looked up the second he entered, her eyes reading him before he spoke. "Someone's out there," he said. May went still. The same men. No, just one, but he's watching. Theo looked between them. What do we do? Eli set his hat down gently, like even sound might shatter the room. We stay ready. That night Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the window with the rifle across his lap, watching the dark like it owed him something. May sat with him a while, neither of them speaking. At one point she brought him coffee, her fingers brushing his as she handed it off. It was a small thing, a quiet moment, but it anchored him, reminded him he wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. By dawn the tracks had circled closer. Eli could see them now from the porch. Whoever it was, they wanted to be noticed. He saddled his horse by mid-morning, ignoring May's warning glance. I have to know, he said. I can't keep you safe if I don't. May stepped forward, one hand on his arm. And if it's not just one, if it's a trap. Eli hesitated, then covered her hand with his. Then I'll come back faster. He didn't. Not by nightfall. Not by morning. May paced the porch in the dark, her fingers white where they clutched the rail. Theo stayed close, trying to act brave, but every gust of wind made him flinch. When dawn cracked across the hills, May couldn't wait anymore. She packed a satchel, grabbed the pistol, and saddled the mule. She found him by the creek 3 miles east, on his knees, his shirt soaked through, the rifle half submerged in the water. Blood trickled down the side of his face from a gash near his temple. His horse was gone. So was whatever or whoever he'd ridden out to meet. Eli, she whispered, dropping beside him. He didn't speak, just reached for her hand like he'd been floating too long and finally found ground. It was a decoy, he murmured. They drew me out. May's blood ran cold. Thea. He's safe, Eli rasped. I left him with a neighbor before I followed the trail. Something didn't feel right. May helped him to his feet, slinging his arm around her shoulders. You should have told me. I didn't want you caught in it again. And I didn't want to lose you. The words slipped out before she could take them back, but Eli didn't flinch. He just leaned into her, like that truth was something he could finally rest against. They got back just before nightfall, exhausted and silent. Theo ran out the second he saw them, tears already streaming. May dropped to her knees to hold him, arms wrapped tight. Eli stood behind her, one hand on the boy's head, his other still trembling from the weight of what he'd almost lost. That night, as the fire burned low, May sat beside Eli at the hearth. We can't keep living like this, she said, waiting for someone to take everything. Eli stared into the flames. I know. Then let's stop surviving. He looked at her. Let's start building something, even if it's small, even if it's fragile. Eli reached out then, slow but sure, and took her hand in his. Together, he said. Together. Spring arrived too slow to trust, dripping through the cracks in winter like it wasn't sure it belonged. The ice took longer to melt in the shadows. The animals still shivered after dusk, but the creek swelled wider, and green began clawing its way up through the frostbitten soil. Eli watched it all from the ridge behind the barn, arms crossed, coat flapping against a sharp breeze. He'd spent half a lifetime learning that change came gradual and quiet, and even the good things had a way of hurting before they healed. Below, May moved between rows of turned soil, planting what little seed they had left. Her hands were blistered, her back tight with strain, but she didn't slow. She never did. Each handful of earth she pressed down into the furrows felt like a promise. We'll still be here come summer. We'll make it, even if we shouldn't. Theo chased the chickens barefoot and hollering behind the coop, his laughter echoing across the fields like it had been waiting years to be let loose. His cheeks were fuller now. His ribs didn't show through his shirt anymore. And most mornings when he came down the stairs, he did so humming. Eli still hadn't touched the room where his son used to sleep. May didn't ask. She just kept working, building, holding up the pieces that Eli couldn't bear to look at yet. Every time she passed through the house, she added something new without speaking on it. A shelf near the hearth, a fresh quilt stitched from scraps, a sprig of wild mint tucked into the windowsill. It changed the place not all at once but in layers, like the ranch was remembering how to breathe. And Eli let her. He didn't say much, but he watched how Theo reached for her hand when he was tired, watched how her eyes tracked the horizon every time a bird flew low across the ridge, like she was waiting for the sky to give her a reason to run. But she didn't run. Not when the well froze, not when the mare got colic and had to be walked through the night, not even when another stranger rode too close to the fence line, tipped his hat with a sneer, and asked who the new girl was. Eli had told him to keep riding, rifle in hand, and the man had listened, but May's hands shook for hours afterward. Still, she stayed. It wasn't love yet, not in the way stories told it. It was quieter than that, hungrier, less about hearts fluttering and more about lungs remembering how to fill with air when someone was standing beside you. It was the way she patched his coat without asking, and the way he always poured her cup first even when the pot was low. They didn't speak it, but they lived it day after day in the silence between chores and the soft clink of dishes at night. Until the letter came. It arrived folded in thirds and tucked under a rusted horseshoe nailed to the gate. No rider, no boot tracks, just paper and ink and the weight of something that had followed them all this way. May opened it at the table while Eli stood behind her, jaw tight. The words were short and cruel. I'll be collecting what's owed before the first thaw. You know what that means. You know what I'll take. No signature, none needed. May sat there staring at the letter so long Theo finally climbed into her lap just to bring her back. Eli read it over her shoulder twice, then a third time before stepping away and pacing to the window. Outside, the sky was soft with early dusk, the hills bleeding pale gold, like nothing had changed. He found us, May whispered. Eli turned. We knew he might. But now he's close, too close. He's a coward, Eli said. Sending letters like threats do the job for him. May shook her head. He won't stop, not until he owns something again. Eli didn't argue. He just walked to the hearth, picked up a match, and lit the corner of the page. They watched it curl in on itself, blackening fast before falling to ash. He's not taking anything from you, Eli said. Not this time. May stared into the fire, her hands clenched. You can't promise that. I can, Eli said, and I just did. They didn't sleep much that night. May sat with Theo until he dozed, then stayed curled near him like her own breath depended on his. Eli paced the porch, rifle against his shoulder, eyes on the tree line. No movement, no signs, but the unease threaded itself through every board, every beam of the house. By morning, May had made her decision. We can't stay here, she said, hands trembling but voice steady. Not if it puts you and Theo in danger. Eli didn't answer right away. He was oiling the rifle, slow and methodical, but his fingers stilled when she spoke. You think running again is safer. I think you're not the one he's after. Eli looked up then, eyes sharp. He's after what he can't have. That don't mean he gets to try. She moved to stand beside him. And what if he doesn't come alone next time? Then we meet him different. Eli. I lost my family once, he said, voice a low rasp. I didn't have a choice then, I do now. Her breath hitched. This isn't your fight. He looked at her, then at Theo asleep on the cot in the corner, a blanket pulled halfway up his face. It is now. For the first time, May looked like she might cry. She blinked fast, jaw tightening, but it didn't stop the tears that brimmed and fell anyway. I don't know what to do with this, she whispered. With being protected. Eli stepped closer, then let it be new. They made a plan. Eli rode out to town under the guise of ordering seed. While there, he spoke to Sheriff Voss, an old friend with a drinking problem and a rusted badge but a heart that hadn't fully rotted. Voss listened to Eli's explanation, then folded his arms and spat into the dirt. That man Crowley, he's been making trades around here for years. Real backroom kind of trades. Young girls, sick families, claims it's all legal, always has paper. You saying he forged yours? I'm saying he forged hers. She was 17, barely. Voss nodded slowly. Law's got holes in it, Eli, you know that. I ain't asking for law, I'm asking for time. Voss tipped his hat forward. 3 days. After that, I can't promise nothing. Back at the ranch, May and Theo packed what little they could carry. Not to run, but in case they had to. May taught Theo how to move quiet, how to stay low, how to hide if the door slammed without warning. And each night, Eli came home later, face harder, hands dirtier, preparing something he wouldn't tell them yet. On the third morning, they found the bird. Dead, nailed to the doorframe. A mockingbird, wings pinned wide like a crucifixion. May didn't scream. She just took Theo's hand and pulled him back inside. Eli burned the bird in the stove and said nothing. The fourth night it happened. The wind changed just after midnight. May felt it first, woke without knowing why, then crept to the window. The lanterns on the barn had been doused. One of the gates hung open. She turned fast, ran to Eli's room, empty. Panic surged in her throat like bile. She grabbed the pistol, shoved boots onto her feet and ran. She found them near the edge of the property, Eli facing 3 men, one of them Crowley. He stood in the moonlight like a man who'd never been told no. Slick hair, gloves too clean, smile too wide. You came back, Eli said. Crowley's teeth flashed. I said I would, debt's still due, Danner. You bring papers again. Don't need to, she's mine. Eli took a step forward. Not anymore. Crowley laughed. You think some backwoods farmer gets to make that call? She's not property. She's not yours either. She's her own, Eli said, voice steel. But she's here and she stays. That's when Crowley pulled the pistol. May didn't remember firing, didn't remember running. Just the sound of her scream and the crack of the shot, and the way Crowley staggered back with a look of betrayal on his face like he couldn't believe someone had finally said no loud enough to echo. He didn't die. But he didn't stay either. The other men dragged him away, cursing, bleeding, shouting promises that vanished into the trees. When it was over, Eli turned to her, stunned. She was still shaking, hands clenched around the gun, face pale. He reached for her slowly, and she fell into him like she'd been holding the world up by herself for far too long. The shot hung in the trees long after the echoes faded. For a moment no one moved. The night froze in place, the shadows, the wind, the very breath in their lungs. Then Eli reached out and gently wrapped his fingers around May's wrists, prying the pistol from her hands before it slipped from her grip. Her knuckles were white, and her lips trembled though she made no sound. She hadn't blinked yet. She stood there trembling, staring at the place where Crowley had stood, where he'd bled, where he'd looked at her like a man cheated of something he believed he still owned. You did what you had to, Eli whispered, voice steady but low. You hear me? May didn't answer. Her mouth opened like she might speak, but nothing came out. Then finally she nodded just once and leaned forward until her forehead met his chest. Eli held her there, arms firm around her back, grounding her. There were no words for a moment like this, just breathing, just the warmth of 2 people who didn't think they'd survive this long and still weren't sure they would. Behind them, the cabin door opened slowly. Theo stood barefoot on the threshold, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Is Mama okay? He asked quietly. May turned toward him like waking from a trance, her voice catching. I'm here, she said, forcing steadiness into her words. I'm here, baby. The boy ran to her, burying himself in her skirt, arms wrapped around her waist like he meant to hold her together with sheer will. She dropped to her knees and pulled him in close. Over his shoulder, her eyes met Eli's again. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Something had shifted. What once had been a fragile truce between broken people had cracked open into something stronger, forged now in blood and fear and the cost of choosing to fight. They didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, they sat together by the hearth, the lamp low and sputtering, while the fire crackled softly and the world outside held its breath. May took off her boots and held Theo against her side, smoothing his hair as he drifted back to sleep. Eli sat in the rocking chair opposite, still gripping the pistol she had fired, still watching the door as though someone else might appear at any moment. The quiet stretched long and thin between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they couldn't say, of all the ways they had changed. By morning the clouds had lowered, thick and heavy with rain. Not snow, not frost, but real rain, warm enough to turn the dirt soft and pull green shoots from the earth. Eli went out first, scanning the perimeter with cautious eyes, his rifle slung over his back. He found no new tracks, no new threats. Only the deep imprint of boot heels where Crowley had fallen and the blood soaked into the mud that would take weeks to fade. May stood on the porch when he returned. "He'll come back," she said. Eli didn't argue. "Yes." "Not alone." "I know." "Then we need to be ready." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in her now that hadn't been there before. Not just fear, not just strength. Resolve. A kind of fierce, reckless loyalty that made him feel both honored and terrified, because she wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She was protecting him, and he didn't know if he could stand to watch her break again. "We don't run," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "Not anymore." Eli nodded. They spent the day preparing, reinforcing the barn door, sharpening tools that could be weapons if they had to. May found the small rifle Eli had once kept above the mantel, his son's, sized for a boy but functional, and brought it down, cleaned it, and checked the sights with hands steadier than she expected. Theo watched all of it with wide eyes, saying little but always staying close. As the sun dropped, a knock came at the door. May froze. Eli turned sharply, already crossing the room, but this time there was no weapon in hand, just suspicion. He opened it slowly and found Sheriff Voss standing there, soaked through from the rain and looking older than ever. "I heard," Voss said. Eli stepped aside. "You get word quick." "Crowley doesn't exactly keep secrets." Voss shook the water from his coat as he stepped inside. "He's been in town already, telling folks you ambushed him, that you shot him over a woman who doesn't belong to you." May tensed behind Eli, her jaw tightening. "I don't belong to anyone," she said flatly. Voss looked at her then, eyes softening. "Didn't say you did, just repeating what the bastard's selling." Eli folded his arms. "And what's the law say?" "The law says there's no proof either way. Man's too prideful to press charges, but he's got money. And that means he's got men, the kind who don't wear badges." Silence fell heavy between them. Rain tapped soft against the roof. "You came to warn us?" Eli asked. "I came to tell you they'll be here soon," Voss replied. "And if you stay, you better be ready to finish what's started." May stepped forward. "And if we leave?" Voss shrugged. "Might buy you time, might not. Crowley doesn't forget." Eli's jaw tensed. "Then we finish it." The sheriff's eyes lingered on them both, long and thoughtful. Then he sighed. "I'll do what I can." He left before nightfall, riding out under the weight of rain and duty and the limits of men like him. When the door closed behind him, Eli turned to May. "This isn't fair to you." May stepped closer. "You think I care about fair?" "I care." "Well, stop," she said, voice rising. "Because this is mine too. You think I'm still that girl he bought like livestock. You think I'm going to run and hide while you defend the land that gave us both back our breath." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Instead, he walked to her and placed a hand on her cheek. "I just don't want to lose you." "You already lost too much," she whispered. They stood like that for a long time, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air. Then Theo's voice broke through the quiet. "If they come, I'll protect you too." May turned, eyes wet. "No, baby, that's not your job." "But I want it to be." Eli crouched down, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You protect your heart. That's the hardest thing." That night they slept in shifts, one by the window, one by the door. Theo curled between them, small and brave and trying not to show how afraid he still was. The storm outside faded. But morning didn't bring peace. It brought hoofbeats. Slow, measured, too many to count at first. Then clearer, 5. No 6 horses. Eli peered through the curtain and saw them, Crowley at the front, pale and smug, bandage at his side where May's bullet had torn through. Behind him, hired hands with blank expressions and loaded rifles. They wore the look of men who'd done worse for less. Eli didn't reach for his gun. He reached for the door handle and opened it wide. Crowley smiled. Come to your senses yet. May stepped up beside Eli, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. Crowley's smile flickered. You know what happens if you say no. May raised her chin. Then say it already. Crowley leaned forward. You don't want your brother to see that, not again. May's voice was clear and sharp. He won't, not ever. Eli took a step out onto the porch. You ride off now and you walk away with your pride. You stay and we end this. Crowley's gaze darkened. You'd risk your life for her. I already did. Then everything went still. One of Crowley's men twitched. Eli's hand moved fast. The shot rang out. Chaos exploded on the porch. And nothing would be the same again. The first shot didn't kill anyone. It snapped past Eli's head and buried itself deep in the porch beam, sending splinters scattering into the air like shrapnel. The second shot did. One of Crowley's hired guns dropped backward off his horse, a scream curling through the wind as his rifle slipped from his fingers. Then it was chaos. Eli shoved May back through the doorway, slamming the cabin door shut behind them just as more bullets pelted the walls. Theo screamed from the far end of the room, and May was already running to him, shielding his small body with hers as they crouched low behind the table. Eli dove to the window, rifle in hand, and returned fire through the broken pane, shattering glass and bone in one breath. Another man screamed. Hoofbeats thundered past the porch. Crowley yelled something, words lost in the violence. Eli's blood ran hot and focused. He'd never wanted this, never asked for a final reckoning, but now that it was here, he met it without hesitation. One more shot cracked from his rifle. Another man toppled from his horse, but they weren't retreating. They were circling. Back of the house, he yelled, voice hoarse. May nodded without asking why. She grabbed Theo and ducked through the kitchen, flinging open the cellar door and helping him down into the shadows below. I'm not leaving you, she called as she turned to come back. You're not, Eli snapped, slamming the cellar door behind her. You're staying alive. A bullet ripped through the window frame inches from his head. He hit the floor hard, shoulder striking the corner of the hearth. The rifle clattered out of reach. Before he could move, the front door blew inward, boot first, shards of wood flying as Crowley stepped in, revolver drawn. The man looked different now. Not slick, not smug, wild. Blood soaked the bandage at his side and fury burned behind his eyes. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about ownership, about pride wounded so deeply it turned lethal. You should have given her back, Crowley hissed, stalking toward Eli. Eli didn't move, not yet, not until. Crowley raised the gun. And Eli lunged. They collided with a sickening crunch, bodies hitting the floor hard, the gun skidding across the room. Crowley was strong, desperate, snarling like a rabid dog. He landed a punch to Eli's jaw that sent stars bursting behind his eyes. But Eli didn't stop. He didn't retreat. He fought like a man who had already lost everything once and would rather die than let it happen again. Crowley's fingers found Eli's throat, squeezing. Spots bloomed in Eli's vision. He clawed at the man's wrist, shoved with all his weight, but the pressure didn't ease. Darkness crowded in. Then, the crash of wood behind them. Crowley froze. May stood in the doorway, Theo's small rifle trembling in her hands. Let him go. Her voice didn't shake, her eyes didn't waver. Crowley turned his head, saw her, and smiled. But it was the wrong kind of smile. Not cruel, not clever, just broken. "You don't get to walk away," he gasped. "I paid for you. I wasn't for sale. I kept you fed. You kept me afraid. You owe me." She didn't blink. "I owe Theo a life without you." Then she fired. The bullet caught Crowley in the shoulder, spinning him off Eli. He screamed, clutching the wound, rage replaced by agony. May dropped the gun and ran to Eli, helping him sit upright. He was coughing, throat raw but alive. Crowley staggered to his feet, bleeding from two places now, pale and wild. "You think you win," he shouted. "You think this ends me." "No," Eli rasped, "but it ends here." Behind Crowley, the door burst open again. Sheriff Voss stepped inside, rifle leveled, two deputies at his back. The sheriff took one look at the scene, Crowley bloodied and wild, Eli gasping on the floor, May shielding him with her body, and raised his voice. "Drop the weapon, Crowley." Crowley turned slow, laughed. "You think I'm afraid of a tin badge?" "No," Voss said, and shot him in the leg. Crowley screamed again, collapsing hard, blood pouring fast now. The deputies rushed in, yanked his arms behind his back, shackled him even as he cursed them all. Voss didn't flinch, didn't speak, just looked at May and nodded once before stepping back outside to call for a wagon. Silence fell hard. Theo peeked out from the cellar, eyes wide, and ran straight into May's arms. She held him tight, her whole body shaking now, not from fear, but from the slow exhale of weeks of tension finally giving way. Eli sat slumped against the hearth, blood on his collar, sweat soaking through his shirt. His jaw throbbed, his throat burned, but he was alive. And it was over. Except it was. Because the worst men don't just die in a day, and wounds don't close the moment the danger passes. Some stay, some fester, and some teach you how to begin again. They buried the dead out past the fence line. The hired men who had followed Crowley to his last mistake. No names, no headstones, just a hole in the earth and a few muttered words that no one would remember. Crowley didn't die, not yet. Voss hauled him back to town, where a circuit judge would eventually hear the case, one May wouldn't have to speak at if she didn't want to. The sheriff made that clear. "Man like him won't see the outside of a cell again," Voss told them. "That I'll make sure of." They believed him. But it didn't change what they'd lived. The cabin took weeks to repair. Bullet holes in the walls, bloodstains on the porch. But May scrubbed every inch with a quiet fury, like she was erasing the final traces of something that had haunted her far too long. Theo helped, brushing paint over the new beams with focused determination, like he understood this was about more than wood and nails. Eli watched them both, heart swollen and unsure. He didn't know how to reach for what he wanted, not yet, but he knew he didn't want to go back to the silence that had filled the house before May came. And so he spoke. It was a quiet evening, the sky pink and low, supper simmering on the stove. May sat at the table, sewing a patch into Theo's shirt. Eli stood across from her, hands tucked into his pockets, staring at the floorboards. "I keep thinking about what you said," he murmured. She looked up. "About what?" "About how I already lost too much." She nodded once, slow. "I think I stopped living after I buried them. My boy, his mother. I kept breathing, kept feeding the horses, kept paying the bank, but I wasn't alive. Not really." May's needle stilled. "And then you came, you and Theo. You didn't ask for anything, but you gave anyway. You gave the house a heartbeat again, and I don't know how to repay that." "You don't owe me anything," May whispered. "Maybe not, but I want to stay worthy of it, of you." She met his eyes then. Her fingers trembled on the cloth. "Eli, I'm not asking for promises, I just want to keep building something. With you, with Theo, with this place. Not for ghosts, but for the living." Tears welled in her eyes. She stood, stepped around the table, and wrapped her arms around his waist. He folded into her like he'd been waiting years for that embrace. Like the broken places in him had finally found something that didn't flinch when they leaned in. Theo peeked in from the hallway, saw them, and smiled. That night Eli opened the door to the room that had stayed closed since the funeral. He lit the lamp. The air smelled of dust and memories, but the crib was gone now, the rocking horse silent, and in its place he placed a new quilt, stitched by May, sewn with her hands full of mistakes and tenderness. When he stepped back out into the hall, May was waiting. She didn't say anything, just took his hand. They went to bed that night in the same room, not as strangers, not as two people clinging to survival, but as something harder to define, something rooted. The fire burned slow. The wind was quiet. And for the first time in either of their lives, tomorrow felt like a promise worth keeping. The days turned warmer, slowly at first, as if the sun itself was unsure whether this stretch of land was worth thawing after such a long silence. But by the second week of March, the frost had lifted from the fields, and the creek behind the barn ran quick again, swollen with snowmelt. New grass pushed through the mud where blood had dried just weeks before. Life didn't ask permission. It simply kept going. So did they. Each morning started the same. Theo fed the chickens, sometimes forgetting to shut the gate, which meant Eli spent the better part of breakfast chasing hens across the yard while May tried not to laugh. Afterward, she mended clothes by the window or baked bread that never rose quite the way she wanted it to, while Eli worked the land, the sweat of purpose finally replacing the weight of grief. In the evenings, they sat together near the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening to the house breathe around them. It was quiet, not empty, not anymore just peaceful. But even peace has corners. Eli noticed it one morning, May standing by the fence line, her hands still and her eyes locked on the tree line beyond. The sky was clear, the breeze soft, but something about her stance put his stomach on edge. He stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on his jeans, and crossed the yard slow. "You see something?" he asked. May didn't look at him. "No. But I keep expecting to." Eli followed her gaze. The trees stood tall and harmless. No movement, no echo of hoofbeats, but he understood. Fear, once rooted, doesn't vanish just because the storm has passed. It lingers in the air, behind doors, beneath skin. "Some days I forget he's gone," she said quietly. "Then I remember, and I still feel like I'm waiting." Eli stepped closer. "You're safe now." "I know, but safe doesn't always feel safe." He nodded. "I get it." She turned to face him. Her hair had come loose in the breeze. Her hands were dusted with flour from the dough she'd abandoned in the kitchen. "I don't know how to stop surviving," she whispered. "I don't know how to just live." Eli didn't speak for a long time. Then he reached for her hand, took it in his, and said, "Maybe we figure it out together." May let out a long breath, half laugh, half sob, and leaned into his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, and they stood there like that, sun on their backs, grief between them, but something more powerful growing in the cracks. The next week, Theo asked if they could plant a garden. He wanted carrots and strawberries and corn if it wasn't too much trouble. May said she'd never grown anything that didn't come from a bag, but Eli smiled and said that was how everything started, with a little dirt and a little hope. They cleared a patch of land near the cabin just beyond the smokehouse. Thea knelt in the soil, eyes bright, asking questions faster than they could answer them. What makes seeds sleep? Can worms hear thoughts? Will the corn know his name if he talks to it every day? Eli let him ramble, May let him dream. That was the whole point. Later that night, while Theo snored gently in the loft above, May sat beside the fire holding one of Eli's shirts she'd meant to mend but had long since forgotten in her lap. Her eyes were far away. "I've been thinking," she said after a long silence, "about leaving." Eli's chest tightened. He sat forward. "Leaving?" Not right away, not because of anything wrong. She looked up at him, searching his face. Just to see what else there is, what I could be. Before I was someone's daughter. Then I was someone's property. Now I'm here, and I love it, I do. But I don't know who I am if I never leave. Eli swallowed hard. You want to take Theo? Of course, but only if he wants to come. He nodded, looked away, the fire popped. I don't want to lose you, he said. May reached out and placed a hand on his knee. You won't, but I need to know who I am outside of being rescued. That word, rescued, it sat heavy in the room because that wasn't what this was anymore, not really. I didn't rescue you, Eli said quietly. You saved yourself, I just opened a door. May smiled. You held it open longer than anyone else ever did. They didn't speak for a while after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because they'd said what mattered. She didn't leave. Not then. Not yet. Instead, they kept living, planting, repairing, laughing in small bursts that grew into full-bodied joy when they thought no one was listening. Eli taught Theo how to ride bareback. May taught him how to spell. Together, they created something that resembled a life, ordinary, sturdy, built from second chances. Spring turned to summer. The garden grew. Theo named every plant. The hens multiplied. The cabin walls, once scarred with bullet holes and loneliness, filled with soft footsteps and the smell of bread that finally rose the right way. Then came the letter. Eli found it folded beneath the salt jar on the table, her name scrawled in shaky script across the front. He recognized the handwriting. Sheriff Voss. May read it aloud in silence, her eyes scanning fast, then slower, then again. She set it down, her hands trembled. What is it? Eli asked. Crowley died, she said. Eli waited. In jail, pneumonia, they think. He'd been sick for weeks. No one claimed the body. Theo stood behind them, watching. What does that mean? He asked. May crouched and pulled him close. It means no one's ever going to come hurt us again. Theo nodded, then after a long moment asked, Can I still name the tomatoes? May laughed, tears in her eyes. Yes, baby, always. After that, something shifted in her. She stood taller, breath deeper, sang more often, even when no one was around to hear. The shadows in her eyes faded, not entirely, but enough. One night after Theo had fallen asleep on the porch swing and Eli had carried him inside, May took Eli's hand and led him into the field. The moon was high, the earth warm, and the crickets loud enough to swallow doubt. I'm not going, she said. Eli turned to her. You're sure? I don't need to find myself out there. I already did, right here with you, with him. He didn't answer, he couldn't. His throat was too tight. So she stepped close and kissed him. It wasn't rushed or unsure. It wasn't made of need or gratitude. It was full, steady, deep. It was a beginning. The following winter was harsher than the one before, but they were ready for it. Firewood stacked high, food put up in jars, blankets sewn thick with care. Theo had grown taller, more curious, more confident. He read aloud now at the table, stuttering over long words but smiling every time Eli nodded with pride. May didn't flinch at shadows anymore. Eli didn't wake from dreams he couldn't explain. And some nights, long after the fire had gone low and the world was dark and still, May would lie with her head on Eli's chest, listening to his heartbeat and whisper, Do you think we deserved this? He would always answer the same way. No, but we have it, and we're not giving it back. They never did. They kept it, fed it, grew it. And in that cabin, far from everything they'd lost, a new kind of family bloomed, slow and flawed and fiercely, deeply alive.